The 2017 NFL season started with Colin Kaepernick not on an NFL roster. 16 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions last season, but Kaepernick is out of the league at only 29 years old. He should be in his prime. The reason has been debated, but it's clear. Kaepernick knelt for the national anthem. He spoke out against police brutality. He started a movement that's still going on today, even with him out of the league. Kaepernick is not necessarily being blackballed in a league-wide conspiracy, but each individual team has made the same decision. Kaepernick's talent is not worth the negative attention he may bring, even though he's one of the best 60 quarterbacks in the world. The result of the Kaepernick protest should not be surprising. We've seen this before, we've seen it in other sports. Once upon a time in the NBA, the Chicago Bulls had a three-point specialist by the name of Craig Hodges. He came off the bench. He opened up driving lanes for Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, a back-to-back champion, the reigning three-point champion. He helped keep the middle clear for center Bill Cartwright.
You know, he not only was a great player, great shooter. He says the best shooter on the planet, who I might argue. But just as a teammate, great person, great friend. Spent a lot of time with him on the floor. He's a good guy, really great guy.
Craig was a great teammate, and I was able to learn, from the older guys. And Craig had been in the league, had success, and he was a pro. He was a pro's pro.
Craig was respected as a serious basketball player, hard worker, and a guy who refined his skill. And knew the triangle so well because he had played for Tex Winter in college.
Man, Hodge and I used to sit on that plane and discuss everything from him being a Muslim, me being a Christian, to the Torah. I think every other religious aspect that is in this country. We used to just diverse with each other about things like that. And then we would get on stuff about the inner cities and us as black men, what we need to do to help the inner cities and things of that nature, man. Our whole plane ride and bus rides used to be about that a lot of the times. If each team had someone like Craig Hodges and his personality and his heart, when I say heart, meaning his mind and his spirit, and the world would be a better place, man, because this guy, he doesn't just care about the urban cities, but he cares about the youth around this planet.
Now, let's rewind back to 1991 and the story of Craig Hodges. The Bulls had just won their first NBA championship and were invited to the White House by then-President George H. Bush. It was a tumultuous time. U.S. forces had been deployed to Saudi Arabia for the Gulf War, and for the first time, there were live broadcasts from the front lines. There were actual Gulf War trading cards. The world was paying attention. Chicago Stadium, where the Bulls played, was also the home of the NHL's Chicago Blackhawks and had maybe its most famous national anthem ever at the 1991 All-Star Game to honor the troops and the USA. As for Chicago itself, the city was in a crisis, especially the African American community. August of 1991, the worst year for homicides in the history of the city. 120 murders. Only the second time in the city's history there were over 100 murders in a single month. The last time was 1974. Craig Hodges was 14 years old.
And for me, I was blessed, like I said, to have had a mom who was heavy in the civil rights movement, as well as my family and the community. And then I had a chance to go away and study at Long Beach State that had some of the best black studies minds in the country. So it was always a fire that was lit under me and something that I felt like I could do to enhance the condition of my people.
Hodges was part of a local self-help program, Operation Unite, and he wanted to make a statement when he went to the White House. So he wore a white dashiki, and he wrote a letter and delivered it to the White House press secretary. It read in part,
"The purpose of this notice is to speak on behalf of poor people, Native Americans, homeless, and most specifically African Americans who are not able to come to this great edifice. Being a descendant of African slaves, I feel it very important our plight be put on the list of priorities. It must be clear that the African American community is unlike any other. We have a sector of our population that is being described as an endangered species. That is the young black man. And the inner cities are in a state of emergency because of the violence we inflict on one another. In studying this condition, we must look at low self-esteem, which is often due to a lack of jobs and not understanding who we are. This letter is not begging the government for anything, but 300 years of free labor has left the African American community destroyed. It is time for a comprehensive plan for change. Hopefully this letter will help become a boost in the unification of the inner city youth, and these issues will be brought to the forefront of the domestic agenda."
Hodges' teammates did not view him writing the letter or wearing the dashiki as a distraction or even controversial. Bill Cartwright remembers Hodges having a moment with President Bush that no one else had.
Well, I just thought that was more being Craig. But you know what was interesting with that is that Craig was the only one to get President Bush's autograph on the basketball. So even though he wore his robes, he was the only one to get an autograph. So it's a little interesting. We didn't view it as being anything other than who he was because he's such a wonderful guy.
Just anticipation of the whole thing, man. I was excited about going to Washington, D.C., getting a chance to go to the White House as a citizen of America. You know, getting a chance to go to the people's house is something that I feel like everybody in America should get a chance to do. And for me, to know that I was not going just for myself, although the joy of me inside like the little child, you know, but at the same time knowing that it was a bigger mission involved. And that being the case, I had to hold my joy as an individual. And until we did our little thing in the Rose Garden, and I told him that I had given a letter to his press secretary or whatever. And at that point, the mission was somewhat accomplished, but at the same time, it was still just an awesome day, man. It was a day that I'll never forget.
In his white dashiki, Hodges put on a show for the president on the White House lawn.
I shot it well, man. I was probably, I think I might have been 9 for 10 or something like that. I probably made my first 8 or 9, and he told, he's like, "Barbara, come over here, you got to see this." And that's something that for me was really cool, man, to see that it was one of those days that I was able to shoot the ball the way I know I'm capable of shooting it and just do it.
B.J. Armstrong had his moment as well, hitting 19 straight bank shots. And as for watching Hodges shoot in the dashiki, that was not a big deal to Armstrong.
I didn't have any problems with it then. I don't have any problems with it now. You know, the diversity within, you know, as an African American within our culture is very diverse. So Craig was very respectful. He was very considerate, and he was very thoughtful. You know, the fact that Craig was a practicing Muslim wasn't a big thing to me. The fact that Craig was very respectful in how he conducted himself and how he respected other cultures, other people, teammates, family. I don't understand what was the big deal, if there was a big deal at all.
But it was a big deal. After the 1992 season, the Bulls called up Hodges and told him they weren't going to bring him back. No other team in the NBA even called Hodges to inquire about his services.
I thought I would actually retire. I would retire a Bull. And in that, I didn't think it would be a thing where me retiring a Bull would be the Bulls cutting me. It would be me actually saying, "Peace, Chicago."
Cartwright had an interesting word to describe what happened to Craig.
Well, I think a good word would be suspicious, that we have one of the better shooters on the planet. And, let's call it for what it is. It's a situation where probably a lot of owners and GMs didn't want to deal with anything controversial. So they would rather just ignore it totally. So to me, that's That's a little more reality to the situation. And it's too bad because Craig, like I said, was a great player, great teammate, great person. So I think he probably should have been on somebody's roster.
Back then, you don't think anything of it, because teams change over the course of a year or two in terms of some guys are signed back and some guys are not. So you kind of don't think about it that much. But after a couple years, nobody signed him, and you start to really think, like, why? Why isn't this the best three-point shooter in the NBA? It's not on somebody's roster. And then, you go to thinking like Senior Hall. He always said, make you say, And then you look at it from a point of, like, does someone know something that we don't know? And then eventually, we understand one reason why he didn't get selected on another team.
Craig was not blackballed from the NBA. Blackballs, if everyone agrees, they said, we don't want this guy in our league. Didn't happen with Craig, Colin Kaepernick. Did not happen with Craig. There are no conspiracies in sports. They're not smart enough to do a conspiracy. They don't cooperate with each other in any way. They try to screw each other on every trade, every signing, every draft, whatever. They send out false information about who they're going to pick, what they're doing, so they could try to trick their opponent into doing something different. The league office is just trying to hold the whole thing together. Nobody's planning to do anything.
Well, my thought then and my thought now are exactly the same, that this is a business. It's a business. And this is the business of sports that we've all chosen. So I didn't need an explanation into asking questions. That's the business that we're in. So and every athlete will experience that in some form or fashion, whether it comes in year one when you're cut from the team, or year 5 when you have an injury, or year 12 or 13 when it's time for you to retire. The game is going to end for you.
Hodges is still shooting that jump shot at Rich East High School, where he coaches the boys basketball team. His players wanted to honor Colin Kaepernick and their coach last season by taking a knee for the anthem. Hodges said no.
I had some athletes last year that wanted to take a knee, and I told them they couldn't. And it wasn't that I don't want you to not protest, but I want you to know what you're doing. I don't want it to be a fad. It's not a fashion plate. This is something that serious people committed themselves to and they died for, and a lot of people sacrificed careers and the like. And at this point in your life, I think it's more important that you study, that you read the history of your forefathers, your ancestors who were committed to the cause, who were stand up, whether they're revolutionaries, whether they're civil rights leaders, whether they're politicians, whether they're sports figures, what have you, but become more mindful and more cultivated in what it is that you're about to speak about, so that when you open your mouth, you know what you're committed to, and you know that there's a consequence to everything that you might say.
If Colin Kaepernick had come to Hodges for his advice, he would have told Kaepernick the same thing.
Had I known, I'd have asked him to delay it, just because, I understand from my situation, a love of the sport, a love of the game, a love for, doing something that you're capable of doing for a long period of time. I think he deserves that opportunity just for the peace of his soul, as opposed to for whatever dollar amount he could garner.
It's clear Hodges misses playing the game the most, but also the lifestyle it afforded him and his family. At one point, Hodges had to sell off his championship rings, not to spite the NBA, but to put food on the table.
It wasn't, and later for the NBA, no, it was a matter of, hey, this is what I need. I would love to hand them down to my children. All that's cool, you know what I'm saying? But it ain't the spirit of it, man. The spirit of it was actually going through practice, on the plane, in the locker room, hoisting up the banner, that was cool. The rings are a part of it, but the rings ain't all of it, man.
Yeah. Hodges' spirit is intact. He recently wrote a book, Long Shot, The Triumphs and Struggles of an NBA Freedom Fighter. Hodges has high hopes for what the future could bring.
20 years from now, man, I hope that the world is a better place to live and that we have clean water, everybody's eating, everybody's housed, and the planet is what it's capable of being, man.
And Hodges takes great pride in having his name mentioned with some of his heroes who also stood up for what they believed in.
Muhammad, Kurt Flood, Jim Brown, Kareem, Bill Russell, and those people who, they stood up for something, man. And for me to be considered in that light and in that carpet, in that fabric, man, is a cool thing for me.
Hodges learned the lesson a long time ago. Colin Kaepernick is learning it now. If you speak out, you are running the risk that your career will end sooner than you want it to. Even if you are talented enough, work hard enough, and are a great teammate, the ones who write the checks may simply say no. It's an unfortunate risk that athletes take when they speak from the heart.